the big problem is thinking about, we need to get this into the Times. We need to get this into the Wall Street Journal. We have to get this covered by the FT. Stop that and think about, I need to reach these stakeholders. What are they reading? I need to reach these people. What are they watching? You're going to find that they have multiple and dynamic reading and viewing habits.
Hello and welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Ann Green, CEO at the GNS Integrated Marketing Communications Group.
And I'm Steve Halsey, the Chief Growth Officer. And Ann, we've got a lot to talk about today. Two topics that are not only timely, but I think they're really deeply connected. Talking about AI's growing impact on discovery, traffic, and search behavior, and talk about what that means for the future of earned media. And yes, it is true, PR is having another moment. It's great to be in an industry that constantly reinvents itself with moments. And just when the critics are ready yet again to declare the press release dead, surprise, turns out large language models kind of like them. I mean, maybe not for click, but definitely for context. So no, the press release, my friends, is not dead. It's very undead. It's a corporate zombie quietly writing its own metadata. And as it turns out, Ann, that's not a bad thing.
It's so funny. You know, everything old is new again. I was telling Steve the other day for our listeners that I've worked in financial services for years and I was walking with a colleague past a bank branch that has a cafe in it. I'm like, well, that was there 20 years ago and they're doing it again. But, you know, it's interesting. This whole discussion reminds me of an event I was at last week. We got invited to, it was an invite-only event by some of the folks from the PE firm Human Ventures, and it was called Media and Brands in a Post-Traffic World. And it was a really high-level audience. You had CEOs or, you know, leaders from a lot of media brands like Forbes and Adweek and New York Times. And you also had brands like Paramount. They've been in the news a lot. You had Meredith, Dotdash Meredith. You had a lot of advertisers. Cloudflare was there, which was quite interesting because of some of the work they've been doing lately to help gate content for Dotdash Meredith. And I think the whole discussion of the event was really zero-click search. That traffic is going off a cliff, that this future that many had predicted and prepared for is happening right now, and it's happening very, very, very fast. And this was a room of very smart people. You could tell a lot of them had just been at Cannes and France, and a lot of folks knew each other. And, you know, we were there also as GNS, but Edelman was also there. So there weren't as many of the integrated comms firms there. But I think for me, the point of view is just underscoring how fast this world is changing, which I think has paired with how fast the dialogue has risen and intensified around the earned media side of this, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, you know, and I think just you talk about who was in that room, and it just really reinforces what a turning point we're at. You know, not just for how stories are told, but for how they're found, trusted, reused by both humans and machines. And that's the part that's different, you know, and what we used to think of as earned media, you know, placement in a publication, quote in a story, maybe even a backlink, is really being reframed by how AI basically gathers and synthesizes the information. And that's really raising the stake for us in comms and PR in a big way. So basically, as I understand it, if an article isn't structured in a way that makes it machine readable, like clear attribution, topical clarity, things like that, then it may never make it into the next AI generated summary or insight somebody sees. And when Greg Gallant was on the podcast a few episodes, he put it really well when he said, the value of PR isn't just in impressions anymore. It's about compounding credibility, meaning how earned media actually becomes training data for the system that shape public perception. So a great media hit today isn't necessarily one that's just a short-term win, but it's one that creates long-term brand value by showing up on knowledge panels, AI-generated answers, even influence how search may evolve. So in a lot of ways, that makes the earned media part of what we do way more strategic, in a lot of ways, way more durable than it was even 18 months ago.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad that you're calling back to Greg, because that 2-part episode on with AI enablement was a good listen. If people want to go check that out, we always encourage people to go back and see the archives. But a couple of things, one is AI is sort of a double-edged sword, obviously, for media. That post-traffic environment for media publishers is really problematic, right? So that was a lot of what the energy in that room was about. And there's a lot of other stuff happening with AI, like slop at scale coming into reporters' inboxes and overwhelming people with marketing messages, also phishing schemes and at scale. But on the other side, the kind of energy and optimism and excitement around with generative engine optimization. By the way, in the room, everyone agreed GEO is winning versus AIO and all the other acronyms. But so that was good to know. That's one clarity there for us all in an unclear world. But I think that the excitement around what this means, let's say for trade magazine publishers, these are entities that have been under a lot of pressure over the years, but they have tremendous authority and domain knowledge in their sectors, whether we work in ag or healthcare. They create events, they create multimedia, podcasts, video, they're doing in-person events. And the fact that we can say to our clients now, it's going to be really incumbent upon us to understand how different LLMs are gathering their information and indexing it, like you said, in different ways, and understanding what does that mean for how our audiences are interacting. Are they on Android phones or mobile phones? Like, which LLM might be the dominant one for them. The fact that OpenAI uses Bing. I mean, all of this stuff is so interesting, and we really, really have to be on top of it. And one recommendation I'd make for listeners is PR Council has a great podcast series, quick hits, called AI Loves PR. And these are, 13, 15, 18-minute, real quick podcasts with different experts who are very, very germane to this conversation. So I definitely recommend people check it out.
Yeah. So I guess, play with the acronym. If your CEO is focused on GEO, then that firm's going to win, right? At least that's what we're doing here on GNS. Anne is really asking us to lean really deeply into GEO, basically as an evolution, not so much as SEO, but really an evolution, just how the entire media landscape is changing. And again, I oversimplify things. So while SEO really focuses on keywords and backlinks, things like that, GEO is really focused on credibility. It's on how you structure the story. It's about relevance. It's all those things that the LLMs use basically to gauge and generate responses. And for me, the kicker of all this is that most of that data is earned. It's how we talk naturally, editorial content, trusted media, industry, blogs, because everything I'm seeing is that the large language models love high authority sources, right? And that was always been a key part of the earned media. Was there's a lot of value in being direct and going direct, having people know it's coming from you, but having that third party credibility and having your brand showed up that way gets it repeated, referenced, retrieved, all things that are really key in terms of the earned media, where again, right now we're starting to see an environment where visibility becomes velocity. And I know there's a lot of challenges with the shrinking newsrooms and everything else, but there is so much power in earned media and making that part of PR more relevant and more strategic than ever.
Yeah, and there's still going to be such a need for that peso model. We're very committed to integration, and I think we see where paid comes in, where owned comes in, where earned comes in, but it's just a new dimension to the conversation. I mean, this is a great segue, unless there's anything else you want to add before I segue in to set up our interview for today.
I think that captures it. The press release is not dead. And, for those groups that have gotten away from the value of earned media, it's more important than ever.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to talk to our guests. I had a great conversation today, that we're going to cut into right now with Dan Nessel, who has worked as a comms pro for years. And I'll do more of an introduction when I get with him. But I would flag the fact that we're talking about earned attention. And what does that mean? And what's the quality of attention? And attention as not a commodity. It's really a precious capital. People like Ezra Klein are talking about that. People like Chris Hayes have written books around attention being under pressure. And so the idea of where we look at the evolution of earned media relative to attention and what does that mean for the media landscape as a whole, Dan has some interesting things to say. So let's cut over and hear that conversation. So my main hope always for this podcast is to have some really deep conversations with smart and fun and interesting people on topics that really matter to communications and marketers, and I would say curious humans in general. And this conversation is very much motivated by two trends, which is the evolution of earned media as a practice and the evolution of media itself, by the way, and then the rise of what some are calling the attention economy. And so, no surprise, my guest is deep in these hot topics. I'm thrilled to welcome Dan Nessel, who excels at the intersection of communications and technology and leadership. And you are a communications leader and strategist, Dan. I don't have to tell you this, and a podcaster, and a lot of insights in this field. Really deep on AI, really deep on what we're going to talk about today, which is earned attention and sort of that evolution of what we've practiced for a long time, which is earned media. And, you're the founder also of Inquisitive Communications and host of The Trending Communicator, which I've been honored to be a guest on, and I really encourage people to check it out. But Dan, welcome to Building Brand Gravity.
Thanks, Anne. It is an honor. I'm glad to be here. And gosh, I mean, last time we were behind the mic with one another was almost exactly a year ago on my show. And it's so amazing to see how much has changed, how much hasn't. I know we're going to talk about AI. It's been driving a lot of that change, but it hasn't been the only driver. And I think that's, people forget that it's a thing. It's not the thing. And, we need to talk about the attention economy, as you said, the profession as a whole. And, of course, weave in AI into it if that makes sense to do so. And I think it always does. So,
well, to get us started, I've been thinking a lot about a paradox, or I'm identifying as a paradox. You can help me decide if it is, which is it feels like in some ways earned media, due to the media itself being under tremendous pressure, is under pressure. And the practice is under a lot of pressure. But at the same time, there's all this discussion and energy and excitement also related to AI about earned media and media itself being on the brink of a renaissance. And both of these realities are tied to media fragmentation, but they're also tied to the proliferation of AI in all its forms. So, you've got the AI content at scale and slop and crap and zero-click search and traffic going off a cliff and things like that. But you also have the way that large language models are pulling and organizing information, serving as the new search, new discovery, really honoring and pulling from sources that tend to lean more into the world of earned media and the practices we've done. So this is a big question, but what's your overall take on this moment of time? And is this a paradox in your mind?
I think I agree with you. It is a paradox of sorts. And I think that paradox lives mostly in our heads rather than in reality because of, what you normally see when any industry is disrupted. You have legacy mindsets and forward-thinking mindsets, and I'm not being judgy about it. It's just that's kind of the way it is, where the approach to media relations and our kind of inherent ranking of media. Like this is top tier, this is mid tier, this is whatever, and there you have the trades, and you have different categories and categorizations, is being turned upside down in a lot of ways. And it's a lot to cope with. And there's still a lot of, I think, whether it's cognitive dissonance or whether it's just straight up, the only authority is the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, et cetera, mindset. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that is, that's sort of our reality now, where everything's jumbled, priorities are jumbled, and I think there's a question of what is valuable and what isn't in terms of the media coverage and in terms of what counts for earned attention.
That's really helpful. You've asserted, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that traditional media relations is in some ways not just outdated, but potentially broken or kind of even harmful sometimes, just strategic objectives. And I think that has everything to do with how it's framed. But when you say that, what are the things you're seeing that seem, wow, this is really counter to what we're actually trying to achieve potentially for a given organization?
I think it's mostly about entrenched values and attitudes about what makes good media and what does media coverage mean on the one hand, right? And on the other hand, I think it's also about the fracturing of the media and the audience environment. And I think I have to give full disclosure here and be brutally honest about my own biases here, because, being in corporate comms for 20 something years and having a stint at agency in the middle, it was always the case that the executive teams that I was serving or working in partnership with when I was in corporate, the only real wins that they understood from their PR teams and from their comms teams were, hey, we got the CEO in the fill in the blank media, right? Oh, the CEO is going to there's going to be a feature on the CEO in the New York Times. There's going to be a feature from CEO in Barron's. We lined up all these wonderful interviews for the CEO visit next week, and here's where we're taking him by limousine to Bloomberg, to the Wall Street Journal, to wherever, right? And we didn't do ourselves any favors as a profession in pushing that as see, we're doing all this great work for you, and these are the results that we have. And I think that was the case for a long time. So the pressure never ceased, and I think it still continues to get that kind of coverage. But also, we didn't resist so much. I think that it was harder for PR and comms folks to say, well, the CEO is going to be here. We have a day for him or her. Not every CEO is like Jensen Huang or Elon Musk or Andy Jassy or whatever. So you have to have a reality check when your CEO or any high level executive is in town, and really be self-aware of where you stand in the corporate pantheon and whether what you're saying is newsworthy or not. And sometimes the answers to those questions are not quite authentic or honest internally in an organization.
It's so funny because we're going to be talking quite a bit about the evolution of technology and platforms and processes that, are really changing the game there. But you're speaking about something that's so pervasive over so many years and is in some ways very analog. It's that human perception of value. And how is it that public relations as a practice, or in media, whatever we want to call it, expresses that value? And that was something I was thinking about in reading one of your issues. You have the Trending Communicator, both a podcast and a newsletter. And the issue before the one that just came out recently, the one before, was about this question of like building on your prior one on earned attention. It was looking at a McKinsey study about, they've discovered this too, the quality of attention. But before, and I want to ask you about that, and we will get to the technology of it all because it's really, really germane and it's changing the thing. But I want to reflect on my own career where you're right. It's like there is this hierarchical value judgment, and it's not always, it's always a qualitative, subjective conversation. And yes, we have a lot of data of why the New York Times drives so much. And that's really, really meaningful. And that can be meaningful to most, enterprises if you're in there. But I remember back with consumer brands at an earlier decade, I used to joke about the O word, which is please don't say Oprah to me. This is before it was fully like, don't use the O word. But it was these things that we put up on a pedestal. And the reason that I'm bringing this up now is I've seen some clients over the past decade or so start to almost devalue or not recognize in executive teams how critical trade media as a category continues to be, or those young reporters at the trade media where you have the chance to train them and inform them and help them versus I don't have time to talk to that person. So, I think what you're saying, Dan, if I'm correct, is that, these old school pressures and tensions and tropes are still very active today, right? And we've got to look at that again.
I think so. And those tropes or those kind of belief systems, what somebody had once sent to me a long time ago in a completely unrelated topic, that our biggest enemy is not externally. It's our own BS. It's our own belief systems, and I think that applies to a lot of legacy organizations in the profession for sure. And I know that agencies have been really pushing the envelope with technology and with kind of, with new developments, but I don't see it always getting through to clients or to potential clients or to certainly to large organizations that don't have to worry about things like awareness, right? I mean, I think we got to be clear that when I say, and maybe when anybody says that, media relations is really, my exact words were it's dying and we need to let it go. But that's a very, I'm a little polemic about it. But I think we just have to understand that we're talking about the vast majority of practitioners and companies. We're not talking about, your Fortune 10 or 50 or 100, because they have different needs. They're already in the awareness game. And they have that, if you have a very heavy financial and investor relations function, and, you're constantly in the media's eye for any move you make with employment or with your finances, et cetera, your media relations need to be really strong. I don't know if your approach would be the same or should be the same. In fact, I would advocate you want to spread out a little bit more to different outlets, but you do need a strong media function.
You talked about earned attention, which got my attention because earned media, earned attention. And the reason is, before we get into earned attention specifically, this whole concept of attention is very of the moment, I feel. I'm hearing discussions about it everywhere. Ezra Klein has talked about today's most valuable capital is attention. Chris Hayes of MSNBC just published a book. I love the title. It's The Siren's Call: How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource. So, endangered resource, valuable capital, that title says a lot. So when you think about attention, and then we'll go to earned attention, how do you think about the concept of attention today, attention as an entity, as capital?
It's where you're putting your eyeballs. So, you have choice. You have more choice than ever before on where you spend your time for your media consumption or for your entertainment or whatever it is online. So what is attracting your eyeballs at a particular time? I think I'm sure there are studies, or I would imagine that there are thinkers out there who are saying, if you attract somebody, 3 times to your website or to your article, then we can count that as attention. Now, I don't get that deep about this because I don't know what the answer is, but I would imagine that that some consistency needs to be there for us to really say, okay, we have your attention. We throw up a crazy advertisement somewhere that attracts eyeballs, on the side of a building or drones in the air. Boy, are we getting attention, right? But if that attention is not attached to a brand or to a person or to something else, then it's kind of fleeting and it's sort of meaningless. It's really more about, okay, is our content or our proposition or our outdoor activation, even whatever it is it worth someone's time where they come and look at it and spend a little bit of time on it? And that's where attention starts. Then they have to make an association with that and your brand or your person. And I don't think you can isolate one from the other, because otherwise it's impressions. And those are, that's kind of meaningless. What we want is somebody comes, they read your stuff, they look at your they look at your video, they watch your video, they spend a little time with you. So then, okay, we can say, all right, we've started. Okay, that's one type of attention. But the other one is, I really need to learn about something. I really need to understand about something. It's not any different from directed search or something like this, where you're moving a little further down the funnel, which may or may not be outdated.
You're making me think of that the marketing funnel is, as you were alluding to, and where it still really resonates and where it translates across disciplines. But in when you were in your last newsletter, when you were talking about McKinsey, they were talking about attention as well, and you're reminding me of separating attention quality from quantity, right? Driving business outcomes. And you also, in that same newsletter, and people should go check it out, we're talking about that question of what drives intent or behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that in the comms world, and, a firm like mine is integrated marketing communications, so we kind of touch different pieces of it, but we started as a communications firm. And I think where you start is in your DNA. that question of, can we measure, maybe use the marketing language of conversion or intent or things like that. But what is your thought about how, in this new world of earned attention, how we start to think about quality versus quantity? And quantity could be like size of outlet, but it may not be the quality. How do you start to parse that in your own mind, Dan?
Well, I think you have to marry the marketing to the communications for that to be understood. That is really where you don't know whether it's quality attention when your target or your customer or your stakeholder first grabs onto to what you're putting out there, to your content. You just have to understand that you need consistency in your content to kind of weed out. And so, well, there's two functions. First is, of course, to present your position and be more and promote awareness, and make sure that your message is getting into the channels and in front of the people that it needs to be in front of. That's your part. But the quality attention part is like paying attention to how people are interacting with that content, and then seeing, okay, well, this one's resonating, this one isn't. And that's, from one side of the equation, you can turn up or turn down dials and change your message. But on the other side of the equation, you have to think, okay, is it not resonating because the timing's off, or because it's in the wrong channel, or because it's the wrong audience? Or is it not resonating because it's really, part of my language, it's crap, right? I mean, you have to, you have to figure it out. And then when it does resonate, again, is it hitting for the right reasons? Did something like go, well, I hate this phrase, but did it go viral? Like, did it hit hard because, you've said something or you've written something that is worth that virality? Or did it go viral because there's something in your content that actually is completely different than what you intended? Maybe there's something funny, or maybe it's you start a new meme, or who knows what it is. But, is it getting the attention it's getting for the right reasons? And the only way to really know that is to be consistent with your output and start looking at who's coming back over time. And from those people who are coming back over time, that's where you're going to see that quality attention, like the audiences that keep coming back, and then the audiences that take action based on what you do. Now, that's another kind of point, is, okay, are they taking action? Are they doing something based on what you're putting out there? That's where the marketing side of everything kind of comes in, but it should be also in the comms world, to measure that the reaction, the engagement metrics are one thing, but is there a actual call to action in your piece or in your content that they can follow? Is there a way to measure that? There always should be, of course. And that's kind of where the quality part of the attention comes in. It's more of the measurable part. So, there's a qualitative way to look at quality attention, I suppose, but there's also quantitative ways. And I think we need to grasp both of those.
Yeah. And how we marry that together. I mean, I feel like all the disciplines of marketing and comms have moved closer together over time, but there's still different silos there. It was interesting. You were commenting on some of the audience segmentation McKinsey was suggesting.
Yeah.
They had about 8 or 9 or so, and you picked out a couple, like content lovers, interactivity enthusiasts, and community trendsetters. And that struck me. And there's, as people who've made up a million names for audience segments over time, as we do, they are made up and subjective, but they also have reality and research behind them and power behind them. And I think what was interesting to me is these seem to be quite attention-based segments. What kind of attention? And, each of us are fans of something. I've been a fan of Sherlock Holmes since I was a child. So all aspects of Sherlock Holmes, that means I listen to a very niche podcast that covers the Granada Sherlock Holmes series from the 80s with Jeremy Brett. And I'm just like a person that's into that rabbit.
It's a good micro segment.
It is a micro segment. And there's more people out there than I realized when I discovered this podcast. But, I don't think we've never thought in terms of these kinds of segments before, but how do these attention-based segmentation feel fresh to you, or feels like something to be revisited and reflect on?
I think that's a good question. I'm fundamentally in favor of breaking down our audiences in any measurable chunks that we possibly can, because it gives you the intel and the insight to know which channels you can use and what kind of content they need. And it's getting a little crazy because, as you know, there are more and more channels available, and there's so much content out there that, again, it's this word fractured that keeps coming up. And I guarantee you, audience out there, anybody who knows me or follows me, you keep seeing the word fractured. That is not an AI thing. That's me. I keep, because I think it's real. Like this whole fractured thing is, it just keeps on shattering and fracturing, and there's very little binding happening. So if we can find ways actually to kind of bind that in different segments, that's actually very helpful. So when McKinsey, my whole piece on McKinsey is really tongue in cheek, and I certainly came down hard on them a little bit for discovering something that we already knew. But sometimes they put out some really good information. I like the idea of their consumer segments, content lovers, interactivity enthusiasts, and community trendsetters. Those are the three that made it into my review, because those are the three that they also highlighted as worth pursuing, right? When you're devising your content strategy, and whatever you're doing, if you are putting out a story about turbines, or if you're putting out a story about legal services, those are two very, very different audiences. But within that audience, who are the content lovers? Who are the interactivity enthusiasts? Do they exist? And are the community trendsetters part of that group? I mean, you'd think that if you're corporate and you're talking about something industrial and it's kind of more that, oh man, this is not going to attract these community trendsetters. You might be wrong in a big way, because, those community people, it exist in every industry, in every vertical. And we would be really lucky or fortunate to figure out how to reach them first and get their attention, which would then kind of turn into a little bit of a snowball effect, because they would get the attention of others. Kind of a take on influence marketing, I guess. But
it's so aligned with how our industry, like many of us as practitioners, have woven influencers as a core part of strategy. Right. And many companies do a great job with that. But I'm kind of shocked still in the client service landscape how many companies do not see influencers as just part and parcel and symbiotic with all of their other stakeholders from a communications and marketing standpoint. There's some incredible best practices there, and yet it's still quite siloed, and there's still a lot of organizations that are just not investing what they should in that area, and it's that evolution of media. But I want to move on to the AI of it all, because the AI of it all is all around us all the time. And, it is a double-edged sword in this area, and the fingerprints here are all over the evolution of this field. I think one of the most interesting things that's very germane to what you're talking about, turning hierarchies on its head and changing what we think is conventional wisdom about what's a good media hit, who's the big fish, right? So there is so much excitement. I think the acronyms have settled mostly on GEO, generative engine optimization, although AIO is still trying to make a play.
Yeah.
But let's say GEO, right?
Sure.
And how it is that large language models, and each of them are a little bit different. There's overlap in how they pull, but they're each a little different. And how OpenAI is using Bing as a crawler, and and other things like Reddit, but what they pull from to create those search results that create that zero-click search environment where you get everything on the page, which is so disrupting publishers, so disrupting media, so disrupting like the incumbents of search.
I think fundamentally we always have to remember that quality content and engaging content and compelling content will always win in the long term. But it has to be smart content, and it has to be done in a way that I think treats AI as another stakeholder rather than as a kind of technical marvel. You have to think of AI as a stakeholder. How does AI like to read what you write? Just in the same way that one of your customers likes to read what you write, right? So I did a little exercise the other day I took a blog post and I said, okay, now, and I was using Claude, and I asked it to just optimize the blog post for search, which, by the way, people should still be doing, because search is still is not going away. Just the results are going to be different, but you should still always think about, writing good content for search. But okay, so optimize for search. And then I said, okay, can you optimize this for GEO? The GEO version was so radically different in structure. A lot of bullet points. They added an FAQ at the end. They added a credibility section, an authority section to establish the authority of the author. And I wouldn't post that the way it was, right? That's not something I would do. So just because you have something that's GEO optimized doesn't mean you should always use it, take elements maybe. But the lessons there are that AI is looking for digestible bites of information. It's looking for a conversational flow. It's looking for content that actually answers questions. So that's why there's a FAQ in there. And, sometimes you have some stuff in the conversational flow in the content itself. It's looking for authority. And that's definitely where media has that kind of light at the end of the tunnel waiting for them. It's looking for authority and credibility. And, it wants to make sure that whatever it delivers to the user is not a hallucination and is real, because, that is something that, even though they still hallucinate and still deliver nonsense, it is something that's important to the AI. So structuring it that way is what GEO is looking for. So GEO, and you were right, each of the LLMs look at things differently, pulls in this information, however they pull in information. The other part of it that I'm just really starting to get familiar with, and forgive me if I get some of this wrong, because I do urge everybody to fact check me on this. But, it's not like search where you're going to create a GEO optimized piece, and then it's going to appear, or going to have a good chance of appearing in the LLMs the next day. That's not the way it's going to work. The piece, even though LLMs have access to the web and they're using web search to find relevant articles, and you're going to certainly have a chance there, it's still search, right? They're still using search. So the search results that they're getting are not any different than the search results you would get when you go to Google and you look. In fact, you can watch the reasoning play out in some of the models, right? What's happening is your piece, that content, is being used for training and for training the model. So it's going to be added to the models, and piece by piece, it will raise your authority, or it will kind of make it into the model's, kind of repository, and be merged into the Borg, as it were. Then, when you search on topics, or when somebody searches on topics later, it will have it in the training, and it will understand the context around which it will find a website, which then kind of builds the authority for that website or for that information, because you've handily provided it with all it needs: authority, conversational content, answers to questions. Okay, this is legit. This is where it's going. So it's multi-layered, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So within that, the media has this is where there's kind of a real interesting trend going on. And I'm not sure what the truth is here, but I've seen pieces say that media should be really excited because, media relations, the focus on top tier media should be stronger than ever, because top tier media is always going to be the most authoritative sources for GEO as GEO gets on. And there's some truth to that. There is authority.
I think you run into the paywall issue more often, though, now with some of those, which is going to be a challenge. Yeah.
It's going to be a challenge, but there was a recent thing from Cloudflare. I don't know if you saw the Cloudflare thing, right? Where absolutely, where they're charging for bots, charging bots to crawl content. You're seeing more and more deals with the media organizations, with the LLMs. So, I think it'll happen more.
Yeah, that was in concert with Meredith.Dash, I think, to try to do some of that gating of content. Yeah.
And that's going to play. But, yes, if you manage to get that high-end media hit, that's not going to really do anything for your GEO. At least not in a visible way and not immediately.
No, to me, it goes back to the trade magazine piece. What are those deeper authoritative that have a whole body of work on a certain area or sector or topic? Right. By the way, thank you for the Star Trek Borg reference. There's never a time in this world not to bring up the Borg, because it always feels,
especially now.
And it's interesting too. What I really liked, I want to pull out what you said, is treating AI as another stakeholder. Whereas, we've talked about in terms of AI practices and getting more familiar with generative AI, encouraging folks to say, imagine this as a young person or an intern, or, you don't want to anthropomorphize it entirely. You have to be careful about what it is and what it's not. And obviously this whole emergence of chatbots and therapy chatbots and companion, that's a whole nother world that we'll do another podcast on someday. Whoever isn't obsessed with talking to their chatbot and will be here to still talk with me, we'll do a podcast. But I think this question of thinking of it as a stakeholder that has to be built with information over time and will find information sources and synthesize them and bring it up, I think that's really powerful. And I really appreciate, I think it was really clear the way you talked about some of these aspects of GEO, which is still developing. We're still learning it. With SEO, there was a lot of work to try to understand and the Google algorithm and what are the hundreds of factors, and Google would release some and not the other. I think we're in this similar thing of trying to discern through practice. But the really interesting thing about this moment in time is you can also ask the entity, tell me what is GEO optimized, or tell me what is generative engine optimized. How do you communicate? What are you looking for? And one of the reasons I think it's really an interesting opportunity for folks who have communications at the heart of our skill set as a practice and also literally as communicators is understanding what different audience needs. An AI is a stakeholder. We're a multi-stakeholder group. Like, that's how we look at stakeholders that way, right? And we understand, why would someone need an FAQ? Why would someone need a statement and context around authority? How do I build that in a way that context come through and is understandable? How do I reframe? I always joke, with clients, like, I can give it to you as a Word document, a PowerPoint, I can do Aldous Lamp, interpretive dance, like whatever format you need, I can recreate it that way. So I think it does seem to give some real power to a group that has quite a broad toolkit in terms of how we communicate with different stakeholders. I don't know, does that resonate for you at all?
That's straight from my my hymn book. I mean, I've always been saying, and I've always been advocating for people with the skills that communicators have to take the lead in a lot of this stuff. And we hold back within organizations, or we're stuck in boxes, or, it's hard to move out of your lane. There's a billion reasons. You could anger the wrong people and get laid off. It can happen. That said, who else should write FAQs? I mean, who else is good at writing, conversational content? The next phase, or the current phase of attention, is, if you're getting the attention of the AI, you need to have content that earns their attention. And that's exactly what it is. This, the kind of things that we do. And it's the same thing that attracts the attention of our stakeholders and of any audience. People like conversational content. People want to know answers to their questions. And if it's you wouldn't necessarily put an FAQ, you wouldn't think to put an FAQ with a feature article, but maybe you do now. Like, maybe you put a little FAQ at the end. Maybe you put a little study guide, because you can do that very easily. Create a study guide for that piece, chunk it on, and then you have all of a sudden something that's a little bit more GEO'd and might be a lot more interesting to your readers. There's a million ways to do this, but it's all comes back to who knows how to ask the right questions. We do. We know how to ask the right questions. We know how to ask the right questions to the LLMs as well. So, both in the creation side of things and then in the iteration side of things, we are by nature curious, inquisitive. We like to interrogate in a positive way, and we like to interview. Right? We're interviewers. We're media people. Let's play that out, and you'll come up with great content. It's just interesting to see how that's evolving within our profession. I've gone down this huge kind of road and rabbit hole of building that into really better and better prompts and better kind of, contextual operations within the AI. But it just started with me asking questions, like, can you do this? Can you do better? Can you do even better? What's a better way to do this? And so on. And it builds out. We could do the same thing with anything we do with AI, and we are the right people, I think, the communicators.
I love that thought about it comes from that questioning nature and from multi-stakeholders. As we wrap up today, what's one thing you wish or hope every communication leader or practitioner will do to think about earned attention in a fresh way, or a step you'd love them to take? Any tip that you want to share?
The number one thing to do is clear your mind of what good media is and think in a new way about what is really important for your message and for your story. Where does it need to land? So the answer there is your audiences, and the audiences has to come first before you think about your media. So, we didn't exactly say this explicitly, but fundamentally, I think that's the big problem is thinking about, we need to get this into the Times. We need to get this into the Wall Street Journal. We have to get this covered by the FT. Stop that and think about, I need to reach these stakeholders. What are they reading? I need to reach these people. What are they watching? If that's the FT, then go for the FT. It's just creating that strategy from the audience first is critically important. So think about the audiences first. You're going to find that they have multiple and dynamic reading and viewing habits. You're going to find that you might have opportunities to get into, and certainly the opportunities are much easier than top tier media. The trades are fantastic. They've done such a great job, I think, over the last 10 years of surviving, building out their technology. They're doing more with podcasts. They're doing more with expert content. They are certainly ahead of the game with GEO just by default, because they're authoritative and they're very technical and detailed, answer a lot of questions. So look at them with a different lens and convince your leadership that this is good media for us to be on. Podcasts, videos, those kind of things. So think audience first, I think, is the thing I would beg people to do.
It's kind of a return to the very, very best practices that are foundational to this field, and yet they get lost so often. I encourage our listeners and viewers to find Dan Nessel, find the Trending Communicator, check out, subscribe to the Substack, listen to the podcast. And Dan, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for being here today. And, thanks for everyone's listening to Building Brand Gravity. Check out our other episodes. Find us, online, on video, and give us your feedback. We always welcome it. So thank you again.
Thanks, Anne.